If you would have said a year and a half ago, what can we do to safely cool this economy but not tip ourselves into recession, right? We've had a year and a half of rate hikes, which could suddenly have businesses say, I'm not going to hire, I'm not going to invest, or consumers stop spending. That didn't happen. So we're actually seeing that soft landing. It is a positive across the board, a really good report.
Stephanie may not be here tonight, but we have to note her expertise on the November jobs report. It was better than expected, with 199,000 jobs added and unemployment dropping to 3.7%. President Biden was in Las Vegas today talking about the strength of the economy.
All told, we've created 14 million jobs since he took office, more than any president has created in all 4 years of a term. Wages are up more than inflation. The economy grew by 5% this last quarter. America's had the strongest growth and now is the lowest inflation of any major economy in the world, but there's more to do. We know the prices are still too high for too many things. That's why I'm fighting to lower the cost for prescription drugs. Guess what? Insulin, $400 a month for people. Guess what it is now? $35.
Joining me now, John Allen, senior national politics reporter for NBC, Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, and Susan Del Percio, veteran Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst. John, let me start with you. I was struck by the president's comments there, touting, saying, great, 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 but there's still more work to do. Got to lower prices. What was the reaction to these numbers today? I didn't hear much from Republicans on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I mean, first off, the president has a big challenge, right? There are a lot of people who still feel like they're not doing as well as they'd like to be. And he's acknowledging that, but that's a difficult message. It's a two-part message. Look, we're doing greater with the economy. Everything looks good this month. And at the same time, still got to do better. In terms of Capitol Hill, anytime these jobs reports come out, you have a partisan divide. Democrats want to talk about what they look at as a pretty good month and pretty good quarter after quarter, and Republicans are not going to stop fighting each other or fighting Democrats to praise Joe Biden, no matter what it says.
Basil, something very notable, I thought, in these jobs numbers today, after months of bad vibes, consumer sentiment is finally starting to improve. How do you think the White House, and more specifically the Biden campaign, should message this?
Yeah, that's an important question, because I was moved by a New York Times article, excuse me, I don't remember who wrote it, but a couple of weeks ago that talked about the challenge that Americans have with the narrative around capitalism. And I thought about that a lot. And to Jonathan's point about messaging, I think the messaging on the actual numbers, the unemployment numbers, the jobs numbers, the inflation numbers, that's all great and it's important. But I think what the White House needs to focus very closely on is addressing the issue of bringing down the barriers to the economic aspirations of Americans. Can they have a clearer path to getting that first home? Can they have a clearer path to moving into the middle class? I think that, particularly for a lot of young voters, is where a lot of the that concern and that worry comes from. And I do think it's a messaging tweak. It's not minor, but it is something that I believe can be done and make a world of difference, because the numbers are important. But if you're not going to necessarily be focused on the numbers, you're going to be focused on, can I plan for the future? And that's the little tweak that I think the White House needs to make.
Susan, this is such an important point because the economic data has been getting stronger for months, frankly, but it feels like it's taken so long for sentiment to catch up. And that could be perhaps because of what people see and feel right in front of them. It is expensive to buy a house right now.
Yeah, that's true. And then let's not forget, about 18 months ago, there was a very strong narrative out there that there would be a recession. So they're almost coming back out of that narrative that there isn't a recession, that the economy is doing well. But you're absolutely right, Simone. It is difficult for people, and it's difficult for a couple of reasons. One, with the inflation we've seen, the ugly truth is that even as inflation comes down, prices do not. Now, I'm excluding supply chain issues for certain items, but for the most part, the prices are going to stay the same. So the question is, if I'm using my credit card, What's my interest rate on my credit card? How much am I getting, and how much is it costing? Am I carrying every month? That's the statement I see. If I want to go out and buy a home now, the interest rates are just through the roof. It doesn't seem attainable. And those are the things that people feel, and they see it firsthand. They see it in their bills. And that's, I think, the disconnect. Now, as people feel better about the economy, that's certainly going to work in Joe Biden's favor. But I think his message, just to kind of play off of what Basil was saying, also needs to be, yes, we're doing better, but yes, there's so many of you that I recognize need to get a little more help. We need to do more for you and show the contrast that we could do better, both in the economy and how people are doing that way, but also lifting everybody up.
I think this is why it's so important that we just give people the facts and we let them make their own decisions. And the facts are the economy is great, but the facts are also that things are still quite expensive. John, these are some more facts. Today, the president actually announced an $8.2 billion with a B, okay, I had to underline it, investment in rail. And it's part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2021. He announced it in Las Vegas. There will eventually be high-speed rail from Las Vegas to L.A. There's more high-speed rail going across the country. I took the Amtrak the other day, John Allen, and I was just like, whoo, Lord, what is going on here? How do you think how big will this impact be?
It's going to have a huge impact on the country, on a country that has had lagging infrastructure, whether you're talking about bridges or roads or you're talking about rail. So from a substantive standpoint, $8.2 billion can do a lot to update America's rail infrastructure and modernize it. In terms of a political impact, it's going to take a while before we actually see this rail improving. So if Joe Biden's in a second term, he's going to get to take a lot of credit for it when people start to see that, start to feel that. I don't think they're going to start to feel that before the next election.
Basil, the president has been traveling the country talking about infrastructure projects that he has funded. His cabinet has been out there. I listened. There was a press call with Secretary Buttigieg the other day talking about this very thing. Is that, to John's point, is that the part of the winning message for 2024? Because people can see these projects going up. They can see, I fly to New York often. I can see the work being done at LaGuardia, but they might not feel the effects of that work until 2025.
Isn't LaGuardia so much better now? My God.
Y'all got to get rid of that carpet.
But I tell you, Secretary Buttigieg was visiting us at Hunter College about a month ago and addressed this very issue, that while they're spending a lot of money on these infrastructure products, he knows, as the administration knows, that they take time. They take years to plan and to get started. One of the things that I think that the Democrats should keep talking about is that these are, by and large, union jobs, which goes back to the earlier point about having the ability to move people into the middle class through these jobs. But I would also say that there are some things that a lot of young voters really care about, not just about transportation, but about how the department is planning for climate change, how they're planning for resiliency. There was a story a couple of months ago that here in New York, there was a landslide, and you had mud on the tracks that actually stopped a very significant artery of trains going from New York City to the state capitol, and it was related to climate change. So I think the connection to a lot of those hot-button issues, particularly among young voters, can motivate them. In and of themselves, they're important, but connecting them to how, again, we're planning for the future and talking about these really critical issues like resiliency and climate change.